Are we live? It says we're live. All right, guys, tonight, why does it look like I'm so zoomed in? I don't really like that. Yeah, that's better. Okay. So, plant medicine and Gnosis, these things go hand in hand. For me, the one is a means to, to the other. And one of the reasons I decided to do this subject tonight, which, by the way, the stream's going to lean more towards Gnosis than like psychedelic techniques or shamanism. But, you know, they're inextricably intertwined in my mind. And the catalyst for this was actually a meme I saw today. They just said, if you haven't realized they control the mainstream narrative and the alternative narratives, you're not awake yet. And then a little while longer, I saw a comment and under one of my videos on this channel. Why does it? Are we actually streaming or not? It says 0. I can see comments. Anyways, let me know if there's any issues with the stream in the chat, please. So I saw a comment on this channel somewhere about how conformity in the psychedelic scene has become a big problem. And this is definitely something I've noticed. You know, when things become pop culture trends, herd conformity tends to become a major influence. And the unfortunate thing about that is that the entire point, in my mind, of awakening and Gnosis and psychedelic transformation is self-awareness, increased self-awareness, self-knowledge, and liberation from that herd conformity pressure. So when we see people adopting the beliefs, like people get into plant medicine and they feel like in order to be authentic, you have to adopt the beliefs of the Shipibo or whoever it is that you're working with. And that is counterproductive in my mind. I have absolute respect for all of those traditions, but I don't think that's our place or our purpose, you know, or the purpose of what they have to offer us. When we talk about cultural misappropriation, it's very strange that the same people, the same demographic that are very much opposed to that seem to engage in the worst form of it. You know, so I wanted to talk tonight more about what Gnosis really is, what it's for, why it's important, how it can be applied, how it is learned, you know, and how it relates to these plant medicines and entheogens. Nice, glad to hear that. So, yeah, I mean, as I'm sure you're all aware, Gnosis means knowledge. And it is, as we are starting to realize, right, they're saying information is the new currency. What does that really mean? Knowledge is priceless, right? The jewel at the end of human history is revelation. And truth is actually discernible, that it is hidden from no one, that it is, the obvious is hidden. Connect your encoder. What just happened? Okay, we're back. Are we good, you guys? I'm getting some weird... Looks like everything's fine, but YouTube is giving me weird messages. Sorry, that kind of threw me off a little bit there. What the hell was I talking about? Oh, yeah. You know, the truth is hidden from no one, and it's all very much in plain sight. It is also a fact that historians are starting to agree that the reason for the suppression of the Hermetic traditions and other shamanic traditions around the world was indeed thought control and also to undermine the sovereignty of people. And I found it really interesting that I did this deliberately. The first interaction I had was perplexity because, you know, people talk about how if you accumulate interactions, then you're going to bias them. So the first thing I did was ask it, why did they ban the mysteries in Egypt and in Rome? And the answer that it gave, based on its data scraping analysis, was to control free thought and to undermine sovereignty. You know, and they built these current institutionalized religions upon the skeleton of Hermes, upon this old architecture. And our entire culture since then they never forgot the lessons, right? They first figured this out probably in Babylonia, but definitely in Egypt, that sovereign or illuminated people who had Gnosis, did not need governance, and they were well aware of it and wouldn't tolerate it, right? So that's why they created monotheism. And then they banned it again in Rome. And they have not forgotten this as a fundamentally important constituent of ruling protocol, that the truth must be occulted at all costs to whatever degree is possible without raising sufficient suspicion to alarm the peasants. And it's not actually that difficult of a thing to do if you have at your disposal the knowledge of the adepts. And the knowledge of the adepts did indeed come from plant medicine, at least to some extent. You know, when we look back through history, we see some strange things. We see Albert Pike in 1851 talking about using a current of some kind to not to transmute lead into gold, but mercury, which is one proton away, and that's exactly how it's done in the laboratory. And we see Eliphas Levi talking about the electromagnetic nature of consciousness. We see Plato, and even earlier, it may have been Empiricles, I can never remember this guy's name, but the guy that came up with the term atom, also conceived of all of the framework, basically, of subatomic physics, that there were particles with antiparticles, and they were different sizes, and they had different functions. And what kind of goggles do you think he was using to look at matter to reveal those properties to him? But the thing is that that's not enough in and of itself. We are immersed in a jungle of information. For a person to wake up to any extent, and then they look around and they go, okay, this wasn't exactly true, so where's the truth? And it's the equivalent of being dropped off in the Amazon rainforest with no knowledge of the plants and trying to figure out which ones are medicine and which ones are food. You have almost nothing to guide you. And in olden days, we would have at least had our intuition, but we have been gaslighted into believing that intuition is not trustworthy, that it is not legitimate. And as a matter of fact, it is probably the supercomputer in the human consciousness. But now that we have been disassociated with that, and we have lost the protocol for navigating intuition with reason, that has been deliberately, these things have been separated with very cultured ingenuity. This is something the elites have learned to do over thousands of years. The manipulation of the population into subjugation. By perjuration. And so, now we have this ridiculous landscape, this nightmarish landscape of people swinging from one side of the pendulum to the other. They're gone from materialist, but now they think that was all lies, so now they think every thought they have is channeled from the Pleiades. Because there is no hierarchical institution that is guiding the process of the evolution of the consciousness of mankind. And there used to be. There used to be at least, even in tribal ayahuasca drinking societies, at least one person present to mitigate the buffoonery that can come from excessive trust of intuition. We don't have that person generally, and we have no way to distinguish them when they do emerge except for our own judgment. And in this current landscape, we are crawling with people that are profit motivated. They are ego blinded because they believe that they have achieved some level of knowledge and understanding that they are actually not entitled to. It's a false investiture. We have a tremendous amount of difficulty with that. We also have a big problem with the inculcation of false doctrines and false methodologies for evaluating doctrines, right? Like, we are sort of conditioned to believe that what spirituality is about is finding someone else who has figured something out and then believing what they tell you to believe. That's not going to do any good for anyone. Look at the consequences of people finding doctrines and trying to adhere to them by sheer willpower, rather than because of organic processes that have caused actual substantive transmutation of the lead of everyday experience into the gold of higher consciousness. That is the only legitimate way that this is accomplished. And it is not accomplished just by drinking ayahuasca or San Pedro or smoking DMT or whatever. Those things will help. But the magician can only attract a force to him if he has made himself a fit receptacle for it. So if you do not engineer circuitry for the current to flow, then the extra current is just going to amplify what's already there. And this is one of the main reasons that we live in a culture that has devalued intellectual development and glorified intellectual laziness, and has also promoted the idea that reason and spirituality are mutually exclusive, that they are oil and water and do not mix. Like 2Ds and no chick, you find yourself in serious shit. Thank you, Biggie. Let me check in with the chat real quick. So, let's go a little deeper now and talk about, for example, as above, so below, right? You hear that a lot, but I question the degree to which people really understand it. And the reality is, if you really want to understand any of these things well enough to justify claiming faith in them, you're going to have to do some work. But I'll give you an example of the sort of thing that resulted in me accepting as above, so below. If you look at the most fundamental generative mechanism that we know of, and it probably is the most fundamental, that's my guess, of creation, we have a reflective process that involves things that look just like synapses. We don't really know what they look like, but theoretically they would look a lot like synapses. We have these two things that create an architecture that are opposed, and they reflect each other, and it's a reversed image, right? And these things determine the mass, trajectory, and arrangement of particles at the subatomic layer of our universe. And if you scale that up, you see this process at every other layer, especially in minds, right? One of the reasons we have this problem with conformity is mirror neurons in our brains. They're responsible for empathy, but they're also responsible for mimicry on all sorts of different levels, right? So we see this generative process at the most fundamental level of the universe that is just like mind. And we hear there's a universal mind, the universe is a thought, and then we find fucking neurons basically generating things the same way that our brains do, very similar processes. And then you look at other scales, right? And you have Fibonacci is reflective, and that's how it's recursive, self-referential, and so reflective. And then if you look at cybernetics and the study of systems in that context, this applies to evolutionary systems and biology and just everything, right? So as above, so below. So you find this principle and you're like, okay, smallest scale, biggest scale that we can find in a like process, it's exactly the same. As above, so below. There was another element to this before I moved on to the next thing, and I just lost it. Yeah, and so we could do another example, like on the at the level of neurons. Speaking of neurons, you don't even have to use neurons. You can just use information as an example. But is it integrated information theory? Right, or Terence McKenna's idea of concrescence flows right into this too. Turns out it's much older, but we'll get there. So information density results in deeper complexity, right? So if you have more neurons and a more sophisticated integrated bundle, then you have deeper cognition and consciousness. That's the correspondence, right? So in all systems, you have this like omega point where there's a maximum point of density and it cannot go any further before, at that point, the system is like fully self-realized, right? So we have in Hindu cosmology this idea that once the universe has fulfilled all of its possibilities, God wakens and the universe ends, right? And this is a cycle that just repeats over and over again. So when it reaches its point of maximum information density, it reverses just like the processes that happen in our mind, right? On the same, different scale, same, what does this say? You're not using your anti-track subscription? I don't care. There was more to that. Okay, so now Penrose comes along and says, once the universe reaches its maximum point of all the possibilities have been fulfilled, the process reverse, it collapses again, systole, diastole. You know what I mean? We see these reflections in everything. And what is as above, so below? It is even a reflection. The statement itself is the thing itself. So like you find these universal truths and then you peg them and they become foundational constituents of your analytical protocol, right? So you can be open-minded, but not become a muddle-headed mystic with wind blowing through your ears. I'm going to give you guys another example. I'm going to have to bring up the screen for you. We're going to use flat Earth as a little model for a moment. Let me get this fixed. And this actually came up because, I think it was yesterday, somebody made a comment about how the cosmological constant proves creation. This is an argument that creationists love to make. And it doesn't really, because this cyclical cosmology, the quantum loop or the Hindu, or, there's other versions of it, but what happened is that there's a big bounce, and the what we called the singularity before collapsed right away because it wasn't stable. And then this happened over and over again and refined and refined and refined and became more stable. And that's, how we got to this cosmological constant, right? But flat earthers are mostly Christian, and they like to use this cosmological constant argument because it is one of the best arguments if you don't understand quantum loop. Sorry, let me bring up more interest there. At least we have this. Where was I? Okay, so yeah, the flat earthers. But if you take like the FBI, the CIA, the KGB, Freemasonry, all of these things, and you calculate an average how much they leak per person per year, and then you extrapolate that to multiply it by the exponential of the number of people that it would require to keep the flat Earth conspiracy secret, and the probability of that being successful is actually way, 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 way more unlikely than the cosmological fucking constant. All right? When I tell you guys, we have the tools to sift through all of the bullshit at this point in our existence. I'm not kidding. You know what I mean? Like, it's so easy. So easy. That's why I brought this up. Look. So, basically what I just said, I was like, if you're looking at the feasibility of flat Earth, if we compare the ability of the Freemasons, CIA, and other secretive organizations to keep secrets, i.e. because they leak often and badly, and we scale it up to the numbers that would have to be involved in a flat Earth conspiracy, what kind of probability for flat Earth secret being successfully kept are we looking at? Using a simple, generous mathematical model for secret keeping, the probability that a flat Earth scale conspiracy could stay hidden for decades is effectively indistinguishable from zero. Okay, and this is just, the physicists that worked this out using a Poisson process. Each conspirator has a small annual chance of causing a leak, and as you multiply that small risk over many people in many years, the probability of at least one leak rapidly approaches 1. He estimated an optimistic failure rate of about 4 fatal leaks per million conspirators per year based on real documented cover-ups such as NSA surveillance and the Tuskegee syphilis study. In this framework, the probability that a conspiracy survives time survives times as t with n for people involved fails roughly like exponential whatever, you know what I mean, there's the math. A genuine flat Earth cover-up would have to involve at minimum large fractions of space agencies worldwide, NASA, ESA. And, there's a lot of other stuff along these lines that people try to believe, I guess, where we have all these different nations. Some of them are not friends. They would benefit. They're in competition with each other. To get people to globally conspire for hundreds of years. I mean, I realize most of you guys are too smart to even consider this stuff, but a couple of you have told me that you're flat Earth curious or whatever, and I just almost die inside hearing that, because it's like, it's not even possible that it's that it's true. So I don't know that we really need to go through all this, but look, eventually I was like, okay, so let's compare this to the cosmological constant, because that is a number so big that if we started counting in seconds now, you would not get to it before the end of the universe, right? And where does it say? Specifically, so ballpark of cosmological constant. There we go. Yes, if anything, the odds for a flat Earth conspiracy surviving are far worse than the fine-tuning level usually quoted for the cosmological constant. I mean, come on, you guys. In natural Planck units, the observed cosmological constant is of order 10 to the negative 122nd, whereas naive quantum field theory expectations give something on the order of 1, implying a discrepancy of roughly whatever. They argue a little bit, but it's a fucking big number. A flat Earth cover-up would require sustained active coordination across millions of people and many institutions worldwide for many decades. Using Grimes-style models, conspiracies with even a few 100,000 participants already have failure probabilities extremely close to 1 inside of a decade or 2. So pushing to millions over generations make the survival probability so tiny that informally it is smaller than cosmological constant levels in terms of how seriously to treat it as a live possibility. And then these guys use the cosmological constant as an argument for their beliefs too, And they're like, oh, well, it doesn't matter if it applies to flat Earth. I mean, the level of fucking stupid on this planet sometimes, I'm sorry, you guys, I know I'm being rude here, but just shit, man. Terrifying. And so, entheogens and Gnosis are a remedy for this kind of bullshit. That's my word. On the reels. Hold on, let me check in with the chat again, and we'll get serious. By the way, we still have space at our retreats. If you're interested, send me an email. And we are going to talk a little bit about trauma and whatnot, and how that all plays in. I've got plenty of experience with that, unfortunately. There we go. No, that's not good. How about there? There we go. Hello, how much did I miss? I mean, I don't know how long you've been gone. So, there is a process. There is an architecture to reality that's reflected in every other part of reality. It truly is holographic in a sense. And so once you learn to see the reflections of this architecture, you cannot be fooled by much, including yourself. This awareness is something that people avoid attaining to deliberately. That's one of our biggest problems in the world. people are comforted by their illusions and the distortions that are presented to them in our culture are generally customized to accommodate that, to appeal to that part of them, you know? And so one of the fundamental things with psychedelics are a hell of a mirror. It's true, you know. As a facilitator, one thing I'm 100% certain of is that the number one cause of bad trips is people clinging to shadow constituents that they identify with, right? Because what happens is, especially if you're older, you know, and you've been living with it forever, it's part of you. You know, you identify with that. So when the medicine comes and tries to pry that away from you, people will cling to it to the death. I mean, almost literally. You know, I had one client that I literally was pretty much determined to either cling to it or to die. You know, like it was a really difficult battle for this person, and that oftentimes is the result of how blind they were to the thing before they were confronted with it. You know, just suddenly it's there and they had no idea. In fact, I had a client, it was also kind of scary because he was like 6'8" and built like a brick shit house, totally harmless, but he didn't look harmless. You know, he was all sleeved up and bald and tattooed and like just huge. And, you know, when he started saying scary stuff, it was kind of like, uh-oh, what, you know, I can't really restrain this monster. But he would slip into this like alternate personality where he would like just say like sly, like slightly threatening stuff. And then he would like, when I was like, excuse me, he would like, turn all normal again, like his, you know, sweet Dutch self. And I knew what it was right away, you know, unintegrated shadow. And later when I talked to him about it, when I said that his subconscious was unintegrated and that it was sort of imposing itself at intervals, he literally said, it never occurred to me that I had a subconscious. So because he didn't even know it was there, it had developed the ability to just insert itself completely. You know, because there's no, like a person that's more integrated would like, you have a sense of the influence and you're able to mitigate it, hopefully. You know, you can learn to if you can't. So anyways, you know, I mean, that is a very helpful tool in this kit, but something that I think is extremely important and undervalued in our culture is that you have to be some kind of artist. You know, if you are a serious musician and you are living insincerely, your music will sound insincere. If you are, whatever it is, however you are out of resonance with your essential self, if you are an artist, it will manifest and you will have an objective gauge to look within yourself, you know, that is unavoidable and omnipresent, you know, if it's something that you do constantly. This is why in the Hermetic tradition, you know, people were given psychoactive plants, but they were also required to study philosophy, to study mathematics, to study geometry, to play music, to study music theory, you know, because all of these things are reflections of the hidden architecture of yourself. You know, it's the universe, sure, but as above, so below, as within, so without as well, you know? And that's the true reality, I think, of the solution, basically, to our microcosmic and macrocosmic problems, is that there is an extreme reticence to accept that there is a necessity to do academic work as an individual that you should actually want to, because what we are, believe it or not, is avatars of the universal mind. And we are like spelunkers, you know, biologists sent into a deep sea cave to figure out what the hell is going on, you know, because it only knows as much as we do to an extent. or those generations of the cycles that have come before us, whatever we figured out before the omega points that time, you know. But that's what we're here to do. And there's this old saying in the Hermetic tradition too that the initiate, whatever the thing the initiate most does not want to do is the thing he must do. You know, and it's not really meant to be absolute, but it basically means that at first, when you realize, like, okay, if I'm going to become a fully realized being, that doesn't just mean, you know, being vegan and like meditating a lot and thinking about light all day or whatever, you know. That's only part of that's only part of the equation, and I'm not convinced about veganism by any stretch of the imagination. But you get my point, you know, that you have to develop the full pentagram. It's called balancing the pentagram. All of the 5 points have to be perfectly in alignment in order for a person to become fully realized. You know, and then if you think about what I was saying earlier with the information density and information integration, and how that results ultimately in a, you know, an omega point where the thing is fully realized. Like in the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram that I talk about all the time, the last Substack post that I did finally post it, you guys go read it, was talking about this and how each pentagram is a holosphere that retains data from every interaction with the magician. And eventually, those holospheres are going to reach an omega point where they cannot contain any more information. And at that moment, the magician himself is fully realized, right? That's kind of an addendum, I guess, but you know, like that's the recipe here. And there are different constituent elements of it that are perfectly organized in the LBRP for you. You know, it really is. If it's not a practice that you have engaged in, I seriously would encourage you, especially if you read my last Substack post, and the subsequent ones are also going to elaborate on this, like why this works so well and why it's also a selfless thing to do. Because what we really need to recondition fundamentally is a sense of self-centeredness, that self-interest is basically God, and it's not. Reason is God. Reason is God, not self-interest. And reason dictates that balance, that biological homeostasis, you know, is something that doesn't just apply to single-celled systems, but it applies to biospheres as well, you know. And when you engage in this self-balancing, because of the fractal nature of the universe, you're balancing the macrocosm as well. You know, when you're doing this in the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, you have the 4 holospheres, so fire, water, earth, air, material stuff, intellect, sex and creativity and power and emotion, you know, and all kinds of other correlating things. And when you balance one sphere, since they're all connected, right, you draw a line through them all to make sure you don't forget that. You're tuning one, they're all getting tuned. So as you go around, you're working on things that you're not even directly focusing on. But you're part of a larger sphere, right? There's a sphere around that play host to these little holospheres. And when you're tuning those, the larger system is also being tuned. You know, but if you're not competent in the processes, then you're not going to get much of an effect, you know. And this takes us back to psychedelics again. One of the reasons that we see a lot of conformity and a lot of misfires, you know, people not getting the results that we would hope, has to do with the fact that preparation is largely ignored. We hear a lot of people talk about integration, and you know why that is? That is because of profit motive. It is because if you tell people they need to go and prepare for 2 years or 3 years before they come and drink ayahuasca with you, you're going to be waiting a while before your clients show up. And really, that is far more important. The integration would be a lot less necessary if there was proper preparation. And people don't want to be told, like, you need to go and learn critical thinking. You need to go read Kant, and, you know, like, that's not what people are trying to hear, but that's the reality. That if you really want to make investitures from these kind of experiences, then you have to prepare fertile soil to plant the seeds if you want to grow anything beautiful and substantive. And, that's the actual reality. You need math, bitches. And of course, there are all kinds of practices you can do. I'm not going to give them all away here. I do consultations. Send me an email, if you want to learn directly how to work through this process. But some basic things I give out a lot are the fourfold breath practice that allows you to metaprogram. If you accentuate that with psychedelics, then you can write your own programs really, really effectively. The practice of meeting everything you think with its opposite is beautiful, amazing. It's the best practice, really, for freeing yourself from bias, because the alchemical secret is, part of it is that when you combine two things of opposite nature, they create a third thing of a higher nature, So if you train the mind to constantly meet every one of your beliefs with an opposite belief, they're going to, because of the nature of the system that they're operating in, there's going to be an interaction, and that interaction is far more sophisticated than you think it is, because your conscious mind has no idea what your brain is actually doing and capable of for the most part. Subconscious processes are far more advanced and sophisticated than even our most advanced cognitive science is aware. There's a lot going on in there, and the barrier between the conscious and the subconscious is largely there to protect us from it. Because it's a lot. Point being, though, when you take these two simple things, they are symbols, and all the interrelated, interconnected correspondences to those symbols in your mind, they're going to get processed. And it's in those subtle connections and relationships that these deeper truths are going to be elucidated, So it may sound simple is what I'm saying, but this thing of holding contradicting ideas in your mind deliberately. And guess what else it does? Listen to this shit. It breaks down your cognitive dissonance, because you're training the mind to, instead of maintaining these things, to actually process them and come up with the philosopher's stone at the end of the alchemical process, So by creating this conscious habit of the interplay of antinomies, to play out in your mind every time you think something, you're also dissolving all of the bullshit that you've been carrying around with you in terms of cognitive dissonance. So that's a good one. Thank you, Aleister Crowley. You evil bastard. We did not receive a manual on how to human. Well, yeah, see, that's the thing, though. We did receive a manual on how not to human. It's called Christianity. It's called Democrat. It's called Republican. It's called Muslim. It's called Klansman. There's a lot of names for it. It's all the devil with a different mask on, And so we do have to rehabilitate ourselves. That's the reality. This planet is a sort of insane asylum. And that dissonance has been propagated throughout the masses and amplified increasingly over the last couple of decades deliberately. It's the fundamental operating principle of the social engineering apparatus. But they're about to learn that me slay people who think me play. Objectivity towards self is the first step towards objectivity towards others. And objectivity allows for pristine reflection. And mirror neurons are responsible for our sense of empathy. So clear reflection means clear understanding, which means clear empathy, which means that we don't have to wear our grudge like a crown of negativity. Once we have forgiven ourselves. And now we're moving on to another point of the pentagram. We started with air and intellect, and now we're in water, which means we skipped fire. But you should, because you can't deal with the fire until you've calmed the waters. I mean, you can, but I don't know if you should. And it's a tremendously difficult process to navigate our traumas and to heal our lineage, really. The main thing that we're doing is determining what we're going to reflect in future generations. Like the DNA is all Fibonacci, it's all reflections, it's all recursive generation. And far beyond the purpose of liberating myself from suffering, I think about not passing on the damage to my son and not wanting to see him obstruct his own progress in the way that I did, because it was literally hell. Literally hell. It's like the more potential and intuition and shit you have, the more self-sabotage is like... they're commensurate with trauma. And one of the reasons it's so tricky is that you unleash new levels of things. Like this solar cycle, I had revelations that sometimes people talk about unearthing trauma with psychedelics, right? Sometimes, and this is what they're talking about. Basically what I'm about to describe. But even as your self-awareness increases, you can have new types of self-esteem issues, right? So I went through this highly revelatory process with the solar cycle, and then now I'm embarrassed to play music in front of people. I've played in front of thousands of people, over the years, and it's true that I'm older and I'm out of practice, and I'm not like I was then. But even relative to just a few months ago, I'm all of a sudden all self-conscious. That can be perceived as unearthed, oh no, I've traumatized myself type shit, But what's actually happening is now I have more self-awareness, so I see what needs to be improved more clearly. It's just more opportunity, But since we're talking about psychedelics in this, and I do want to make sure I mention this, the idea of resurfacing or re-traumatizing, it's not really real. The issue is that we don't really have people that are equipped to process this stuff. And this serves as kind of a warning as well, because I have a lot of experience, with psychedelics, I've studied all kinds of different schools of psychology, and, Hermetic magical, ritual magic is all about consciousness and I've been deep in there for a long time, and this was almost too much for me to process successfully. And all that happened was a small puff of 5-MeO-DMT, not a trip, no whiteout, nothing wild. And I just remembered something in a way that I had done some psychological gymnastics in my wiring so that I didn't have to deal with it. And one of the things that 5-MeO-DMT does is it strengthens, with the dendrites, which results in memory enhancement, right? Improvement, which is good, except when something like this happens. So processing this over the course of the subsequent 3 or 4 weeks at least, it reframed so many of the things in my life that even though it was just this one little connection in my mind, just a little bit thicker, a little bit stronger, the reality of it is that if I had made a decision differently, my mother might still be alive. And it's not that it was a direct cause of her unaliving herself or anything, but it is true. And so many things, so many of the decisions that I made that were major, major turning points in my life, I wouldn't have made the way that I did if I had known this thing consciously, and it was just so completely, utterly overwhelming and staggering. And, if I had had a regular job to maintain, or, if I didn't have the level of freedom and ability that I have, it would have been disastrous in retrospect, Luckily, I have the experience and the toolkit, that I was able to, slowly but surely I don't know if I'll ever come to terms with it, but you know what I mean? Get back on track and make something useful out of the experience, Really, the bullet point of this presentation is that kind of thing, I think, is another one of our impediments, because I think a lot of people subconsciously know that they have wiring like that. I know people that I know do, for sure. A lot of you guys tell me oh yeah, when I take LSD or mushrooms or whatever, I it's fine. But then if I take ayahuasca, I don't remember anything. And no, I'm not talking to you, because there's 3 or 4 of you. I'm talking to all of you. It's not just one person. And that's what that is. There's something like that is going to emerge with such velocity that it is going to fuck up their trajectory, And if you are locked into a family life and, you don't have time for that, it's a really difficult thing. The issue, of course, is that if you do not address it, you should not have a family, and that sounds harsh, but it is the reality. When we have these things lodged that deeply, that are that disruptive, to our development and our ability, as long as this thing of that great importance was lodged in my being like that, my reflection is, as is distorted. My ability to reflect and perceive is distorted in accordance with the magnitude of that buried fucking time bomb. And unfortunately for those people, I really don't have much of a solution. I don't know that there is one, except that you have to make time and space. This is one of the reasons people try to come to our retreats for 3 to 5 days, and I'm like, you need to go somewhere where people serve tourist medicine then, because you never know when something like that is going to emerge, and you need time, to get it together again after something like that happens. Look at me. Since I brought it up, I'm obviously a little bit off now, which means even I probably haven't processed it as much as I thought I had or something. And maybe I still don't know what to do with it or about it or something. It's definitely not as bad as it was a couple months ago. I was really shocked that how much it could, how much of an impact there was, and how it was something that was almost in my conscious mind. The maneuver I had done to get around it was so subtle you know. And then when it hit me, like it's like the last 10 years, or let's see, 2013, 12 years, it just reframed everything, you know. Now, however, there were subsequent revelations that could not have happened until that thing was removed that are even more important, that have made me more whole as a person. You know, I was able to accept things about myself once I realized this one thing wasn't true. I guess maybe I had the courage now to look directly into the face of something else that was a big impediment for me. And I found out something really validating there, you know, tremendously, like really, really important. And that opened the doorway to all kinds of incredible developments. So navigating the crucible, you know, is a worthy endeavor. But I'm not here to sugarcoat things and tell you that it's not without difficulties and risks. It also is true that even if you succeed at all of this stuff, you still may fail overall. And you still have to do it anyways. The chances are exponentially lower. Another element about this that's really important, though, you know, I mean, it's like this explosive potential with adding entheogens to this equation. You know, it's like if you ride a bike to California, it's going to take, from Virginia to California, it's going to take, what, 2 weeks or something? You can do it in 16 hours in a Lamborghini. But if you wreck the bike, you're just going to scrape your knee. If you wreck the car, you're going to die. That's kind of the equation, you know. I would modify that by saying that for people with a lot of trauma, you know, there's definitely an element of like potential for overwhelming yourself. Under the right conditions, with the right guidance, chances are much better. But again, bullet point, don't be in a hurry to come here for a week, you know. If you think you might have shadow of that kind of magnitude to process. Violence is an interesting meditation. Yeah, I mean, oh, that might be relating to what I was talking about earlier with holding the two opposing ideas in your mind. Man, I really unexpectedly messed myself up with that last subject. I'm noticing I'm kind of like almost, you know, like my body language and stuff all of a sudden is like saying a lot. That's wild. We didn't make it very far around the pentagram. And we don't need to, I guess. I mean, I think I've communicated pretty clearly what I came here to communicate. And that pleases me. If you guys have any questions or subjects that you would like me to offer my 2 cents, then you can pop them in the chat. I'll be happy to engage with them. I feel like we're a little bit unfocused tonight. I'm not going to lie. I'm this was one of those days where I'm just exhausted, for no reason. I got plenty of sleep. But when I was starting the stream, I was kind of like, uh-oh. Kind of feeling like a sack of meat hanging on bones, All right, let me see if you guys have given me anything to work with in the chat. I don't see anything. Those of you that just popped on, I think this was, solid stuff. But I'm not really sure how much more I have to offer along these lines tonight. Basically what we talked about was integrated information theory, the holographic nature of reality, the true meaning of as above, so below, how to spot bullshit with laser-like precision. Really, actually, not that difficult. And, I guess my closing statement tonight is that despite all the tribulations and chaos and unexpected developments, and, it's been a rocky couple of years. And I'm not talking about in just my world, because it's all reflections, right? It's on every level we're seeing this. Reward is commensurate with risk and resistance. Order comes from chaos. All of this stuff really is just fuel for the light. And this is one of the fundamental reasons that is so important to learn to recognize truth. Because we can only reflect the things that we align with, right? If there's a beam of light here and I move the mirror over there, I'm not going to reflect the light. And the truth is that when opposites interact, the result is always the emergence of something of a higher nature. When we see destruction and bombing and all, you see that and you just go, well, how is anything of a higher nature coming? Wait. And I'm not at all condoning or, this is one of the tricks of this kind of illuminated thinking, is that you have to be able to compartmentalize. We see an empire fall, but when has another one not arisen? It's this constant process of refinement and regeneration. And historically, since the beginning of time, literally since the first moment after the first bounce of the singularity, the light won out over the darkness by like a fucking angel's breath. Almost not. But hear me out. Once that pattern was established, it cannot be undone. The light has already won. The light within you, the light within me, the light within all of it. If that wasn't true, evolution would not result in creation. Species would just die and then there would be nothing. In every scenario that we can observe, even though the generative process is dependent upon this interaction of life and death and dark and light and, the whole dualistic dance. Once that pattern, the light emerging victorious, was established, there's no possibility of deviating from it. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe. Consider becoming a patron. We're demonetized, so I get no support unless you guys support me. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you tomorrow night.